Hi, my name is Bob and welcome back to the homestead, y'all. Well, in this video we're rebuilding another one of our solar trackers. So this is a DIY solar tracker. It's going to come in around $120 or so. The Unistrut has went up significantly since I built the last solar tracker. These have went up to $22 to $23 for a 10-foot piece. And then the control unit that I was using isn't available anymore. So I had to order a different type control unit, and they're around $60. The bolts that we use in this, we've had sitting around, but if you have to buy bolts, that's going to be a little bit of extra cost. But the first video that we made on our solar trackers, on rebuilding our solar tracker, I didn't do a very good job videoing how we acquired the head, which is the black piece. Everything that you see is black. The silver is your Unistrut. But I didn't do very good explaining on how we went about trying to find these. And most of the time you can get these for free. This one we got for free. So I'm going to show you that in this video and show you how we took it apart. Brought it back to the homestead, just knocked the rust off of it, put a quick coat of paint on it, and then mounted it back on our pole. And then we're going to mount the Unistrut on here. So at this point, we're ready for a linear actuator on here, and we're ready for solar panels. But that's going to be part one, is showing you how we find this, how we acquired the head, or the satellite dish, and then how we mount the Unistrut on it. Now in part two, we'll show you mounting the linear actuator. We'll mount the solar panels. I'll show you how to wire up the solar panels, which I did not do in the first video. So like I said, hopefully I do a better job in this one. I'm sorry for everybody that watched that video. I know we had a lot of people asking about the combiner box, and I had to go back and make a video answering a few questions. But this one, we're going to mount the combiner box. We're going to wire in the solar panels to the combiner box, so that way you get step-by-step instructions. We're going to wire in the linear actuator in part two, and we're going to wire it up to a battery, so that way we have a battery backup that will run our linear actuator, our actual solar tracker, off a battery. And it's just going to be a small 12 volt 7 amp hour battery, but it'll be enough to run our solar tracker, and that way we don't have to power them directly off our solar panels. So we'll show you how to wire that up, along with wiring the controller up too. But in this video, like I said, we're going to show you step by step from the time we acquire the head, how we acquire it, all the way through to mounting the Unistrut, getting ready for solar panels. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you to all our subscribers. By you watching and supporting our channel, we get to keep making quality videos for you to watch. Also this week, I'm making another video simultaneously. We're installing our biogester to where we can create our own methane. So when that's out, you'll have to make sure to subscribe to us, so that way you get notified whenever that video comes out too. So for now, let's get started. Okay, this is what you're looking for. You want an old satellite dish like this. Today we're going to show you how to take it apart and get the head off of it. Of course, take the dish off, and then we're going to build our solar tracker out of this head. So the first thing you want to do is detach the satellite dish itself. It has 4 connection points, one here, one down there, and one up there. So what we're going to do is take these 2 bottom bolts out first. We'll take one of the top ones, leave the last one, and let the dish slide right off on the ground. Now you have to be careful with these old fiberglass dishes, because they are heavy. Okay, this is what we want. This head, there's 3 bolts around this that we're going to have to try to get broke loose. Once we break these loose, we'll take a hammer, knock them up, and slide this whole head right here, right off this post. So this is what we want. This is what we're going to build our solar tracker out of, is this head right here. Okay, this has our head taken apart. You see, I took it apart in 3 pieces, 4 counting the linear actuator. So we'll get this loaded up. We'll get the dish taken apart, get it loaded up, and get it back to the homestead. And then when we get back to the homestead, we'll clean this up real good. We'll put a coat of primer on it and a coat of paint on it. Okay, that has our dish taken apart. I did want to talk a minute about how to find one of these dishes. You can drive around out in the country and find one in somebody's yard, and generally you can stop and talk to them and they'll just give them to you. If not, they won't charge you much at all for them. Most people want them out of their yard. What we did is we took a picture of an old satellite dish that I had and posted it on our personal Facebook page and asked our friends and family, hey, does anybody have one of these in their yard? And sure enough, one of our neighbors, a friend on Facebook said, yeah, we've got one, come over here and get it. So they were nice enough to give this to us. So we have the dish taken apart now. We have the tracker head that we want. We'll take this dish and we'll use it for something else on the homestead. And I have my brother-in-law coming over in a couple days with a tractor and a front end loader. That this is too far away from us to bring my tractor, which I could drive it. It's probably 7 or 8 miles from us. But my brother-in-law just lives about a mile up the road, so he's going to bring his tractor and front end loader and we'll dig this out. We'll lift this up, put it on my trailer, and I'll take it back to the homestead. But all you have to do is just ask your friends and family, post a picture of it on Facebook and say, hey, does anybody have one of these in their yard? And like I said, generally they'll give it to you. So now we have a new head. We just need to clean it up, primer it, paint it, and we'll be able to rebuild our solar tracker. And when it comes to cleaning up your heads, cleaning all the rust off of them, putting a coat of primer or paint on them, that's all up to you. I have taken these before. The very first one I built, I sandblasted the whole thing and blew it off with my air compressor, wiped it down with acetone, then put a coat of primer and a coat of paint on them. And I did a really good job on it. Of course, it was the first one I built, so I wanted it to look good, but since then, if they're like this, they're not in too bad a shape. This one here is over 40 years old. The gentleman I got it from, he said that he'd lived in that house for over 40 years and it was there when he moved there and it didn't work. But it's in great shape. They primered this steel, probably from the factory, and there's very little rust on it. I mean, there is some rust, but I've just taken a wire wheel on my drill and knocked that rust off. Now there's some pitting on here and it's not that big a deal. You could take an angle grinder with a wire wheel on it for these big sections and it would do it a lot quicker. But I found out over the years that using a wire wheel on a drill, I can get in these corners better. I can get in all these little spots a lot better than I can with an angle grinder. So that's why I use this. You can just get right in there and it knocks the rust off. So really all you need to do is knock all the loose paint or primer, in this case, off, and then all the loose rust off of it, and then I'll blow it off with the air compressor and take a rag and a little bit of acetone and just wipe it down, and then I'll put one coat of spray paint on it. Now what I use is this Rust-Oleum, this high quality Rust-Oleum paint. You can use whatever color you want. You can use gloss, you can use flat. I buy these at yard sales and estate sales. Anytime I see cans of spray paint, I just load it all up in a pile and they give me a price, so I get them for pennies on the dollar. So most of the time I try to use black, but I've used green before. Just whatever I have on hand is what I use. I did take the turnbuckle apart and I have it painted here. And I have the little bolts and spacers here for the linear actuator painted. I'm going to go ahead and get this painted and get the rack up here, get it sanded off with the wire wheel, get it painted today. Hopefully I can get everything painted. And then I'm going to start working on the linear actuator. Now the linear actuator, I tried to turn it and it's froze up. So I'm going to have to take it apart and see what the worm gear looks like. I'll video that so you can see how to do it. If I can't get this one working, then I do have a spare linear actuator that I can use on this project for now. And then maybe this winter I'll take the time and take this one apart. But for now, I'm just going to knock all the rust off, all the loose paint off, get a coat of paint on it, and then we'll get over here and we'll start putting it back together. Now one thing, I just put one coat of paint on these because whenever you're putting it back together, you're going to scratch it up, you're going to knock some paint off. Same with putting the Unistrut on there, you're going to hit it with wrenches. So what I do is I wait, and just before I put my solar panels on, I'll go back and I'll take some spray paint and I'll touch it up real quick. And just hit the spots. This is going to last my lifetime. It'll probably last my children's lifetime. This is all 1/4 inch steel. So it's in great shape. So if you get one coat of paint on it, it's going to last a long time. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and take this in, blow it off with the air compressor, wipe it down real quick, and then bring it out and get another coat of paint on it. Okay, once you get your pole mounted in the ground, however you're going to mount it, these are whale casing that we had a whale driller come in. We're close to rock here, so we had them come in and drill 15 feet down to the ground, put a 20-foot piece of whale casing in. Now this one is a little bit shorter than my other two because it's in front of it. It's south of those other two trackers, so I wanted them to step down, the tallest ones in the back, and then I offset the middle one off to the side, and then I offset this one also and made it a little bit shorter. So however you're going to mount your pole on the ground, get it mounted. So the next step is, once we get our head cleaned up, it's time to mount it on the pole. Now, this is a real critical point of mounting your solar tracker. You want to make sure that your tracker is facing south, actually just a little bit off from south, about 2 to 3 degrees. I know which way south here, so I'm just going to line mine up with the other solar trackers we have. But you need to, wherever you're located, it needs to be facing south if you're in North America. Of course, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, somewhere south of the equator, then it would be the reverse. But where we're at here in Tennessee, we need to have it mounted south, just a few degrees off from south, true south. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up with my other two trackers. But right in there should be south. I know this is the back of my tracker because of this little tab here, so it should be facing north. And then once you get it lined up, then you need to tighten up all your bolts. So what we'll do is we'll line this up, and then I'll come back and I'll tighten all 3 of these bolts up, so that way the tracker's locked in place. Don't forget, when you choose your location to mount your pole, make sure it's the sunniest place you have. You can see we're a couple 100 yards from our tree line this way and a couple 100 yards from our tree line that way, in all directions, so that way when the sun comes up in the east in the morning, we get full sun all the way till the evening. So you want to get as much sun as you can, so make sure you pick a sunny location. Don't mount one of these right next to a tree line. Anyhow, once you get your pole lined up, your head lined up to the south, then you want to come back and you want to tighten your set screws. Now these bolts here, what hold it, keeps your tracker from coming off, especially if you live in a high wind area. You're going to make sure to get these bolts good and tight. Now once you get your head mounted and you get the rest of the head mounted, if you realize you're not exactly south or a few degrees off from south, you can always spin this a little bit, but it's a lot more difficult to spin around once you get everything on here. It's easier to get it right the first time, get it right when you put the head on. So we'll tighten these up, and then we're going to mount the next piece on. Now this is the next piece we have to mount, and I know which way it goes because of this tab. And this tab here, that's where our turnbuckle goes to adjust our seasonal adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up in there and get this bolt in it. Once we get our turnbuckle in here, we can adjust it up or down depending on what time of year it is. This time of year we're in a transition stage, so I'll probably have it set somewhere right in there. But for now I'm going to leave this loose so that way I can move this head around, and that way when we go to mounting our solar panels on it, we can move it wherever we want to make it more convenient to mount our solar panels. Okay, now that we have our north-south pivot point mounted onto our pole, let's talk about the angle of your solar tracker, where it should be. Now, if you're going to build a dual axis solar tracker, this is where you would mount your linear actuator. It would be right here where this turnbuckle is. You can see the distance. So you would need a smaller linear actuator if you're going to use these original brackets. If you have a larger one, then you're probably going to have to weld you a new bracket on your north-south pivot point. But how do you figure your angle for your solar trackers throughout the year? Now, I move our solar trackers about 3 to 4 times a year, depending on the season, because as the sun travels throughout the year across the sky, it changes the angle of your solar tracker. So let's talk about your wintertime angle, especially since wintertime's coming up. Here in Tennessee, we're at 36.5 degrees north latitude. So that's exactly what you want the angle of your panels to be for the wintertime. So your wintertime adjustment should be at 36.5 degrees. Now, how do we know that? Okay, this is a handy little tool right here. It has a magnetic base. This tells you the angle. You can see the hand moves as I tilt the base. It has a magnetic base on it, and I have it sitting right at 36.5 degrees. So this is my optimum wintertime angle. Now, as the season goes along and transitions from winter to spring, usually in March, I'll come out and I'll loosen this locking nut right here on the turnbuckle, and I'll lower this angle. And as the summer goes along, we get into June, the summer solstice. That's when the sun's at its highest point here in North America. So what I'll do is I'll turn this turnbuckle to where the north-south pivot point is just about flat. Because the way the sun comes over, you want those panels to be flat, and they'll the tracker will track it throughout the day, and you'll get the most efficiency out of your solar panels by doing that. But since we're fixing to go into winter time, I thought I would just go ahead and set this angle for our optimum wintertime angle for now. I am going to take this turnbuckle off to mount the east and west pivot point. Sometimes it just makes it a little easier as you're mounting the rack to be able to pivot this back and forth freely. So I'll take this off as I'm working on it, and sometimes I'll leave it on because I want this north-south to be solid. So I just wanted to show you that. I'll grab the camera, get you a closer angle of this tool, and you can buy these at Lowe's, Home Depot. They're actually for roofing, to tell the pitch of a roof, but they're not that much. I buy them at yard sales. I have 3 or 4 of them that I've bought for 50 cents or $1 at a yard sale. So I just pop that on there, and I know that this is my optimum wintertime angle. So if you have any questions on that, please leave it below, and I'll try to, hopefully I described that good enough for you to understand. But I'll grab the camera and I'll show you what I mean. You can see this is 0, so if your base is at level, it'll be at 0 degrees, and then at 10 degrees, 20, 30, and where we're sitting right now is at roughly 35 to 36 degrees. So that's exactly where I want it for the winter time. I take this base around to my other trackers, I set it on the solar panel, and then I adjust it accordingly. So now that we have our north-south pivot point mounted, it's time to go ahead and mount our east-west pivot point. I have mine sitting down right here. The main thing you'll have to worry about is to make sure you get it on correctly. It can only be 180 degrees out. But you'll have brackets on that mount for your bracket for your linear actuator, and that's the easiest way to tell which way it goes if you've forgotten. Whenever you're taking these satellite dishes apart, we video our tear down, so I can always go back and look and see how something was designed or how it was set up. But if you don't video it, make sure you take some still pictures, so that way it'll be easier for you to go back and look at and when you're putting your solar tracker together. So let's go ahead and get our east-west pivot point up here, and we'll get it bolted on. thing you want to make sure, once you tighten them up, that this pivot's real easy. I have had a solar tracker before that would tighten up at these points whenever it came across. So what I ended up doing is I ended up taking this bolt out and putting a washer between these two brackets. So I put a washer between this bracket and that bracket, and a washer between this bracket and this bracket, and that eliminated the problem. But it looks like this one's going to pivot pretty easy. I could probably tighten that top one up a little bit tighter and see. I didn't put a whole lot on it. Let's see how it does. Okay, it's still moving freely. So, this is your east-west pivot. This is what's actually going to track the sun for you. So what you'll have to do is, you'll have to get the linear actuator on, and then we'll adjust it, and I'll show you how to adjust it. And what we'll do is we'll adjust it at almost completely east is where we'll start. So we'll start when the sun comes up in the east. This is going to be our home position. So this is where we're going to set our linear actuator at its furthest point is right here. And then as we come across, we'll let it come all the way across to the west side at its furthest point in, and then we'll set our limit switch so that way it'll stop at this point. And then in the evenings your controller will send it back after dark to its home position, which will be waiting for the sun the next morning. So it's basically going to work like a sunflower. So that would be a good name for a solar tracker, sunflower. So now we have to get the linear actuator, get it fixed, get it mounted. If I can't fix the one that originally came with this, I do have another linear actuator in the shop that I'll get, and we'll use it on it. I've had it sitting overnight with a liquid wrench on it and with PB Blaster both. So I haven't checked it yet this morning, but I'm going to put it in my vise and take a pipe wrench and see if I can get it to spin. If I can't, then I'll grab the linear actuator out of the shop and we'll continue with this build. So this is basically what you're wanting from your satellite dish. You don't need any of the other parts except for the pipe to go in the ground if you don't have a pipe. This is our head. This is what we're going to hook our linear actuator and our solar controller to. Now that we have our east-west pivot point on, we need to measure and we need to find our center point. Now most of these are built 3 foot by 3 foot. So this is 3 feet here. So I want to find our center point, which is 18 inches. And I want to mark our center point at 18 inches. Okay, and then we're going to do the other side the same way. Bend this down. Well, that wasn't too well. And then we're going to mark this side at 18 inches. So that way, we know when we go to mount our Unistrut that we're going to have it mounted center. You can get these at any of the big box stores. Just regular old Unistrut or Super Strut. Now there is a thin and a thick. You want to get the thick. You want to get this thicker one. I'm thinking it's 1.5 inches. Yep, it's 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Okay, so these, I put a center point on the edge. You can see this is what's going to be our bottom whenever we mount it. And this is the edge. Now there's my center mark. So we're going to line this up on this center mark. So when we get ready to mark this, and we'll flip this over to where it sets a lot easier. But for now, I just want to show you. Here's my center mark, and there's my center mark. So that's where I want to mount this Unistrut. So that way I have the equal amount on both sides of the east-west pivot point. And then we're going to do the top the same way. So what we'll do is we'll flip this over flat to where this Unistrut stays sitting on there. And then we'll mark it. And then we'll drill it. So that way we can bolt our Unistrut on just like this. And we'll do the top the same way. So what we're doing is pushing it right in against these metal tabs, using them to help brace the Unistrut, and we'll run a bolt all the way through and out the bottom with a washer on it, and we'll bolt these Unistrut to this east-west pivot. So that way, this is what we're going to mount our solar panels on, is this right here. So this is what it'll be doing throughout the day, tracking the sun. So this is how we're going to mount it. I have my 2 center points lined up, and you can see the flat side of the Unistrut is down, so it has the most connection with our east-west bracket, our pivot. So this is where I want to mark it. I'm going to mark it from the top, make a mark on the steel right here on the top, and drill all the way through the bottom, and then we're going to put a bolt with a washer on the top and a nut with a washer on the bottom, and we'll do the same on this other side, and then we'll set the top one, we'll do the same with it. I have my 2 center marks lined up, my center mark for my Unistrut, my center mark on my east-west pivot. They're lined up. I'm going to make a mark where these holes are, and try to center it on these side pieces as best I can, and center it in the hole on the Unistrut. But what we're going to do is, I'm going to flip this over, I'm going to show you how to find dead center on this. So that way when we drill our hole, we're exactly the center of this piece of steel. And also I want to show you what I'm going to use. We're going to use these 1/2 inch stainless steel bolts. And 1/2 inch fits through the holes in the Unistrut just fine. Here's the mark that I just made. And we want it dead center. Since this is an 1.5 inch piece of steel, dead center is 3/4 of an inch. So I marked that one exactly correct. We're going to measure up here. That's exactly 3 inches from this outside edge to there, so we can make sure that we have them both in the same spot. And that way they should sit up against this. So let's mark this one. Measure it. I got that one right dead on it. Okay. And then 3 inches. Now that we have our marks, we know where our hole is going to be. You want to take a center punch, which is a punch with a sharp point on it. You want to put it right in the middle of your X, your cross, whatever you want to call it, and tap it with a hammer. What that does is, when you go to drill this hole, it'll keep your drill bit from walking on you, and you'll be able to drill a hole exactly on your mark. So I like to give it a couple whacks. That way I know I have a good mark. We'll come back to this side. We'll do this side the same way. Come right in the center of this mark. So now that we've center punched that, I know that when I start to drill it, that my drill bit's not going to walk on me. Now another thing is, I'm using 1/2 inch bolts. You can use 3/8 bolts, should be plenty good. I wouldn't use 1/4 inch bolts, like a 1/4-20 bolt. That probably wouldn't withstand the wind unless you're in a real low wind area. If you have very low winds, then you might get by with a 1/4-20, but I wouldn't use anything smaller than a 3/8. If you're like us, you're in a high wind area, then I would use at least a 3/8 and maybe even a 1/2 inch. We're going to use a 1/2 inch on these, so I have a 3/8 bit. I'm going to drill my 3/8 bit hole first, and then I'll come back and drill my 1/2 inch hole. First thing I'm going to do is turn this back up, put my piece of Unistrut on there, line up all my marks, and make sure that where I took my punch and marked my hole, that it's in the correct position. Always make sure you use a lock nut or at least a lock washer on these. These things take a beating throughout the year. They take a lot of vibration with the wind. So make sure you put a Loctite washer or at least a locking nut on them. And then I like to come out about once a month and just give everything a quick check it over, just to make sure nothing's came loose. We'll take this down and flip it up and take our square and make sure we get center of the piece of metal on the east-west pivot point. So that should have equal amounts. If we take a tape measure and we measure from the end to here, same with that one, same with this one, same with that one, it should all be the exact same length. Also, by pulling it up against these brackets, we should be square on both ways. So what we'll do is, after we get this mounted, we'll go ahead and we'll measure from corner to corner on each one, and we'll make sure that we're square. If we're not square, there's enough room inside this Unistrut hole that we can pivot one side or the other and try to square it up, because we want it perfectly square, so that way when we mount our solar panels on there, our holes line up. And then I did bring my cutting oil out here from the machine shop. I've got a little bit of cutting oil here, so I'll put it on this drill bit, and that just helps cut the steel a little better and keeps your bit cool. You don't want to get your bit too hot or it'll dull your bit. That has us. So what we'll do now is we'll check and make sure we're square. We'll measure corner to corner and across in between the top and the bottom. Make sure everything's square. If it's not, then like I said, there's enough adjustment in these little holes that I should be able to slide it. And then we're going to go ahead and put our dial indicator back up, and we'll go ahead and get our turnbuckle hooked back on. So let's go ahead and do that first. I'll get our dial indicator, I'll put it on. Now our turnbuckle, we didn't really move it, so it should be in the exact same position. So I should be able to just slide this up, put the turnbuckle on, and it still should be at 35 degrees. 35 or 36. And I'm going to go ahead and just leave it there, because it's getting close to winter time anyhow, and I shouldn't have to move it again until about March. I'll tighten all that up later, but we should be good. So let's look at our turnbuckle, our dial indicator. And yeah, we're right at 35 or 36 degrees. Okay, so we should be good. Let me get a tape measure. We'll measure corner to corner and we'll see how square we are. This is a little difficult by yourself when the wind's blowing. .124. 124. So we're exactly square. So that's great. So if we measure between each one, 28 inches, 28 inches, 28 inches, so we have 28 inches all the way across. So that's great. So now we can put our linear actuator on, which our linear actuator will mount right here, and it'll go up to this part of your east-west pivot point, and then we'll be able to put panels on it.